Okay, let's begin. We affirm in our first contention is expanding coverage. Cause 19 explains that 87 million Americans are currently uninsured or underinsured, meaning their coverage is inadequate. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, Albert 20 also furthers that up to 50 million more people could lose their jobs in employer-sponsored health insurance. So Bear 19 finds that the main reason Americans forego insurance is high cost, and Ditazi 19 contextualizes that people earning less than $25,000 a year would pay more than $7,000 for a family health plan. Thus, SAT 18 explains that 30% of Americans, or 98 million people, have held off seeing necessary medical treatment in the past year. Luckily, Galvani 20 explains that by extending healthcare to everyone, Medicare for All would save 68,000 lives per year. Our second contention is rural hospitals. Our for-profit system is failing in rural America, as Archer 20 explains that 120 rural hospitals have closed since 2010, and 1 in 4 rural hospitals are currently at risk of failure due to high operating costs. He explains because millions of rural Americans cannot afford care coverage, rural hospitals aren't reimbursed for much of the care they deliver, rendering 40% of them unprofitable. Medicare for All would fix this in two ways, and the first is through global budgets. Kai 19 explains that under M4A, hospitals would switch from being paid on a per-patient basis to having global budgets. They would receive an annual lump sum distributed in monthly payments and extra funding in case of deficits. Surpluses would go back into the global budget, which guarantees stable revenue. The second is by increasing reimbursement. Tarlo 19 explains that specifically for rural hospitals to serve high levels of uninsured and Medicaid patients, Medicare rates could actually result in a big pay bump, since Medicare rates are about 20% higher than Medicaid and there would be no more uncompensated care. And increasing insurance rates are critical. For example, Lindroth 18 explains that expanding Medicaid access by 15% decreases the closure rate of rural hospitals by 66%. For these two reasons, Archer 20 explains that Medicare for All could save 453 rural hospitals around the country. The first impact is quality of care. Gujral 20 explains that a rural hospital closure increases patient mortality rates by 9%. Luckily, Archer 20 explains that helping rural hospitals will benefit 46 million residents who currently have poor health outcomes than those in urban areas. The second impact is food security. Herman 18 explains that when rural hospitals close, the communities often lose their biggest employers and closest access to healthcare, struggling to stay afloat in the aftermath. This is devastating, as Caro 9 explains, as the plight of so many young people is transforming rural communities throughout the nation into impoverished ghost towns, destroying America's agricultural industry, which feeds hundreds of millions of people. Our third contention is economic growth. Those who can afford healthcare do so at a high expense, as Lanehart 19 explains that the average American spends about $10,000 per year on healthcare through insurance and other fees. Luckily, Medicare for All provides free care for all Americans, increasing economic growth in two ways. The first is by reducing the debt. Elrich 19 explains that in the past year alone, Americans reported borrowing or making heavy withdrawals against their future to pay for healthcare by tapping into long-term savings and retirement funds to the tune of $214 billion. The Commonwealth Fund finds that 79 million Americans struggle with medical debt, and Elrich furthers that an additional 45% of Americans, or 147 million people, could be bankrupted by a sudden health emergency. Hamel 16 explains that medical debt hampers families' abilities to pay off other debt and buy basic necessities, and for this reason, Vague 14 concludes that higher levels of private debt impede economic growth. Luckily, Medicare for All would wipe all of this debt away forever. The second is by increasing consumer spending. Providing free health insurance would increase consumer spending, as more money would be freed up to purchase other goods. As demand increases, manufacturers ramp up to meet demand and raise incomes as well, creating a cycle of economic expansion. Thus, Obama 16 explains that slowing the annual growth rate of healthcare costs by just 1.5% would increase US GDP by 8% in just one decade. The impact is immense. When people spend more, other countries export more products. That's why Aurora 04 explains that because of economic linkages like trade, a 1% increase in US growth is correlated with a 1% increase in growth in other countries. Thus, the OECD explains that economic growth is the single most important way to reduce poverty around the world, and a 10% increase in a country's average income would reduce poverty by 20 to 30% by improving quality of life, giving hundreds of millions of people around the world a new chance. Thus, we affirm. I will send the case doc right now. Okay, just it.
I'll send our cards after I read the case. Is anyone not ready? Our sole contention is price controls. Medicare for All gives the government control over the cost of drugs, which will decrease drug prices and destroy innovation. As Whitman and Rad 9 argue that single-payer systems are characterized by a great deal of monopsony power that pushes down compensation. Prices for prescription drugs in Europe are 35% to 55% lower than in the United States. Systems control costs by upstream limits on physician specialization, technology diffusion, capital expenditures, hospital budgets, and professional fees. Easton 18 finds that if US drug prices come under bureaucratic control, as they have in most of Europe and Japan, Pharmaceutical companies would have to reduce their R&D budgets by 80%. Subpoint A is innovation. Small companies do the majority of innovation. According to IANO 18, the majority of drugs approved in recent years originated at smaller outfits, 64% of them. Unfortunately, price controls in the pharmaceutical industry destroy the ability for these companies to innovate in two ways. First, internal revenue. Vogel 2002 writes that the primary purpose of patents is to protect profits as an inducement for innovation. An easy way to circumvent the intent of a patent on the pharmaceutical is to use price controls. The immediate effect of this policy would be to eliminate the economic profits. Unfortunately, Vogel explains that in the presence of price controls, less money is available for research and development. Second is external investments. Price controls damage investment in biopharmaceutical companies. As Sarah Cliff 2018 writes, lowering drug profits would make pharmaceuticals a less desirable industry for investors. This is because the possibility of low profits poses a risk to the industry. Unfortunately, the decreased investment directly impacts the amount of money that biotech companies put into funding R&D. As Cliff continues, less investment in drugs would mean less research towards new and innovative cures. In fact, this all actually happened in 1993. After Clinton discussed a new fiscal policy for pharmaceuticals, Dickinson 94 concludes the proposed legislation constitutes de facto price controls like under Medicare for All. They continue that at the time, fear of the legislation's impact is already having a detrimental effect on investment in biotech. Dickinson concludes the number of biotech initial public offerings fell from 43 to 25. One company even had their stock price plummet by almost 50%. There are two impacts for the destruction of American innovation. The first is an inability to cure cancer. Dickinson reports that after the biotech shock in 1993, 44% of companies specializing in cancer research had already had their work curtailed because of capital constraints. They term price controls as the dominant reason. 62% predicted further restrictions if the legislation is passed. They continue, if research is cut, cures will not be found. The National Cancer Institute in 2017 quantifies every year there will be 1,688,780 new cases of cancer of any site. The second impact is stopping pathogens. Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia writes in 2014, required medical responses must be continually replenished. This requires cutting-edge biotechnology to create large-scale industrial responses, yet each breakthrough inevitably leads to the pathogen's mutation, rendering previous treatments less effective. Cifferlin 17 quantifies every year in the US, at least 2 million Americans are diagnosed with an infection that doesn't respond to antibiotics, making innovation incredibly important. Subpoint B is barriers to entry. Stewart 11 finds that drug prices tend to track per capita national income levels within each drug category. Average price differences between industrialized and middle-income countries are largely due to high prices in the US. Mello 18 finds that because the market for prescription drugs is global, but is propped up by high prices in the US, tamping down drug prices has a zero-sum game quality that is unique. Overall, Stewart 11 finds that in low-income countries, or LICs, they only pay 6% of what consumers in the US pay for essential drugs. The impact is expanding access in low-income countries. Danson 3 concludes that price discrimination increases access to pharmaceuticals by 4 to 7 times. Goldman quantifies that a 1% decrease in revenue leads to 4% fewer drugs entering the market, and a 75% decrease that pharmaceutical companies expand globally due to high barriers to entry. McNeil 19 finds that nearly 20 million Africans are now on HIV treatment for under $100 every year, thus we negate. Okay, I emailed the card.
Okay. I guess I'll just refresh for a second. Okay. Amanda, you good? Okay, I guess we can start crossing. Jack, you good?
Yeah.
Okay. So on your second subpoint about a barrier of entry, you tell me that the reason why drug prices are so low in the developing, in low-income countries is because of high prices in the United States. But
yeah.
If drug companies were to increase the price of drugs in these lower-income countries, doesn't that decrease access and mean that companies are making less profit?
Yeah, just our Kyle 5 evidence finds that in order to physically sell in these countries across the globe, they need a base of capital from the US because you need to find manufacturers and suppliers and different things in order to distribute it like across the ocean and around the world. So they're not going to have enough capital from the US in order to actually like physically sell there, even if there was like a profit to be made. That's
Wait, but I
basically our
don't
argument.
Can I have a really quick follow-up? But
Yeah.
aren't costs like manufacturing and distribution usually one-time cost just to set up the infrastructure? Why do they have to have so much money
There's
in the
like
US?
there's fixed costs to distributing, like different people they have to pay to like work for them in those countries, people they have to like send to get it to the pharmaceutical industry. Just overall, Kyle finds that like having price controls decreases the probability of them entering a foreign market by 75% because they're not going to be able to cover those high costs of like expanding internationally. And
Okay.
then just on your on on your second contention about like your second link is that Medicare for all has Medicaid rates, and then like in your example of like a 15% increase in like Medicare, whatever, like decreases rural hospitals like closures by 60%. Is
Mhm.
that in places like in those places there's still private insurance, right? Like in that
Wait,
study.
hold up. So, so first, um, I think it's just like two questions. So the Tarlo evidence says that Medicare is 20% higher than Medicaid. And then the specific question about Linroth, Linroth talks about the percentage of people who are uninsured in a community, um, and when you expand Medicaid into that
That's
community.
in that community there's still like private insurance. It's not only Medicaid, right?
Um, Probably, but I would say like
Okay.
in rural communities, like the there's a disproportionate number of people who are uninsured or on these government-run programs simply because there's like not as much wealth in these communities. So, can I take a question now?
Yeah.
So, on your first point about innovation, and then on your first link about internal revenue, what does your link have to do with like patents?
Oh, it just says that like when you can't like there's no point in innovating because like small niche drugs like for cancer, if like you can't charge like enough prices to cover the revenue. It just
Oh,
said
so
like
the
patents
argument is just
protect
about.
innovation, but like price controls like defeat the purpose of that.
Oh,
Um,
okay, that makes sense.
and then on your impact on your third contention at the bottom, you're just saying that like when the US grows, you like invest in other countries, right?
It is like a mix of investment, but it's more so like trade because a lot of products that we
Okay.
buy are manufactured overseas.
So like our economy has been growing for a while. Just empirically, how much has this increased like the economies of other countries?
Um, I mean, that's time, but I mean, quite a lot. I think a lot of people have been lifted out of poverty, like because of economic growth. We do a lot of trade with a lot of countries. It benefits, a lot of people.
Okay, it's a lot.
All right. Cool. Oh, could you point me to like what was the card you read about how what was the evidence? What was the card name for like your cancer impact?
Dickinson says that like 44% of the research was cut when it price controls like were really close to happening. And then the National Cancer Institute says that like there's 2 million cases per year.
All right, cool. I see. Thank you. All right. I'm just pulling up my timer. Cool. Is everyone good? All right. Starting on, sorry. Yeah. Starting now. Starting on the top of their case about price controls. First of all, this is terminally not unique. Just yesterday, Trump passed new executive orders that would A, allow the government to directly negotiate drug prices down, and B, tie the price that Americans pay to those foreign countries pay, which are way lower. In effect, what this would achieve is giving Americans the same prices as countries with single payer systems already. All like their entire case is just terminally not unique, but let's respond to it anyway. First, price controls don't harm innovation. This is because Levy tells you that lowering drug prices decreases the market size for pharma companies. Levy finds that setting the price cap at 20% lower increases the number of patients using the drug by about 23%, since people currently unable to afford the drugs are able to hop onto the market. This increase in the number of users almost completely offsets the adverse effects of the price regulation from the perspective of pharmaceutical companies, which is why revenues would only decrease by 1%, like their impact doesn't happen. And secondly, Whitman tells you that price controls have no effect on innovation because of profits of like drug companies are already so inflated that even if profits were cut by a third or a half, there would be sufficient incentive to assume the risks of drug development. So even if we matched like price controls like in European nations and cut it by a half, we would still see innovation. And third, Jung analyzed the records from the two most successful pharma companies and found that merely 11% of their products were discovered in-house. The majority were discovered and initially developed by third parties, such as universities and the NIH. There are two implications. First, innovation is not nearly as high as it could be in the status quo. And second, you can turn it because Han 16 writes that as companies lose revenue, they invest more in research spearheaded by academia, which is less risky and more innovative. They read you this card from Easton claiming that R&D will be reduced by 80%. It's really bad evidence. It just randomly like makes the assertion that the profits of pharmaceutical companies have to be tied to those of the chemical industry. It doesn't give you any warranty why, like, don't evaluate that. Let's talk specifically about their first subpoint about small pharma innovation. You could cross-apply all the responses about how profit never goes down, which is why, like, A, they still have a lot of internal revenue, and B, external revenue doesn't go away because investments see that, like, profits don't go down. They're obviously still investing. But also you can turn it because under Medicare for All, drug prices will be set based on how useful they are, which incentivizes companies to produce actually innovative drugs. If what they're saying is true that small pharmaceuticals produce the vast majority of innovation, this actually benefits them the most. Small pharma is reaping the benefits of like value-based pricing under our world. Light explains that this happened empirically way outweigh in probability because in European nations with price controls, they've actually innovated more than American companies in the past 40 years. And secondly, Keith 19 explains that under Medicare for All, payments to pharma companies can't be used for marketing. This is critical as Eichler 13 finds that for every dollar pharma companies spend on basic research, they spend $19 on marketing. There are a few implications. First, R&D is such a small subset of spending, it's the last thing they'll cut. And secondly, you can turn it because under Medicare for All, companies could dedicate billions more to innovation. Third, because like such big companies are now spending more on innovation, that probably outweighs any like marginal loss in small pharma companies. And fourth, like a lot of small pharma research is spearheaded by big pharma companies. So if they're doing better, small pharma companies are doing a lot better as well. And then let's talk about their specific impacts. First, their first two impacts are like really improbable because they need to prove that they'll be able to find a cure for cancer in order and like find a cure for infectious diseases in order to like gain any impact on like reducing deaths. And yeah. And secondly, let's talk about their subpoint B about barriers. They just tell you that when the pharma companies have revenue, they're able to subsidize prices in lower income countries. However, empirically, this doesn't work. Taylor tells you that because pharmaceutical companies still have to charge high prices to recoup the cost of innovation, a lot of these times, these lower income countries still are not able to afford these drugs. And secondly, because of parallel pricing, pharma companies are scared to charge at lower prices because they're afraid that these people in lower income countries will just sell the drugs back to them in the US at higher prices, which means that the only world in which this incentive goes away is under Medicare for All, because pharmaceutical companies are selling directly to the government. They don't have an incentive to jack up prices in lower income countries.
Can I see the Keith card that they're not allowed to market? Or I guess if you just have a rebuttal doc, that would work. If not, then I'll tell you specific evidence.
Oh yeah, I can share the doc. And well, okay, the cut card isn't in the doc, so I'll send that to you.
Okay, yeah, I just want to see Keith, and then the parallel trade evidence.
Did you send it?
I'm sending it right now. I can send.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I just sent
Just tell us
the,
when you send it.
yeah, I just sent the Keith one. I'll send you the parallel trading.
Thank you.
All right, I just sent it.
Okay, thanks. And then just in this document, what's the author name for like the value-based pricing turn?
Oh, that was just directly from the bill. I can send you like the portions from both bill that says value-based pricing.
Oh yeah, that'd be good. If you could send that, and then we'll just take prep once we get that.
Okay.
All right, we just got them, so we'll run just like a little bit of prep. All right, that's 2 seconds of prep used. I'm gonna go frontlining our case and then down theirs. Actually, no, I'll start going down their case and then frontline ours. Is anybody not ready? All right. On the contention one about access, their link is reliant on access increasing in their world. That's not the case. You turn because of doctor shortages. Pipes find that Medicare for All would pay physicians 40% less than private insurance pays, causing thousands of PCPs to exit the market. For further analysis, A, because in order to pass Medicare for All through conservative legislation, they would most likely have to agree to the lowest cost plan, but B, the M4A bill grants the HHS Secretary Azar the power to negotiate the payment rates, and O'Brien 18 finds that he supports major healthcare cuts. He wouldn't give hospitals enough money to raise PCP pay. That has two implications. A, it turns the impact. There's less access on net when there are fewer doctors and higher demand, so we outweigh on magnitude. More people die and are pushed into poverty in their world. But B, prereq, even if people have access to hospitals, they don't get treatment in time. Prefer this turn over their contention on probability because CF reports that doctors in the UK make half of salaries of their US counterparts, and as a direct result, the UK has to cancel 9 million appointments in a year. On rural hospitals, their first link is that rural hospitals get more funding in the act because of global budgeting. 3 issues with this. 1, only one bill talks about global budgeting. It's more likely it would just be Medicare reimbursement rates since it's Medicare for All. That has more support. But 2, empirically, O'Brien finds again that Azar, the guy in charge of funding allocation for M4A, has approved of and supported major healthcare cuts made by conservatives. They give no reason why the secretary would negotiate the global budgets as high as they talk about in case when he literally wants to cut healthcare spending right now. But 3, because hospitals aren't paid per patient, if their argument is true and the amount of patients hospitals have shoots upwards, hospitals would be even less likely to be able to afford patients than they are in the neg. But their second link is increased reimbursement rates in the AFLA. You turn that as well. M4A forces hospitals to run on a deficit, as Russo 19 finds that Medicare for All would have hospitals operate at 13% costs that aren't sustainable. Daly 19 quantifies that 90% of hospitals would face 200 billion in cuts, and Abelson writes that hospitals would offset these steep cuts by closing, laying off hundreds of thousands of workers, and abandoning services. There are two implications. 1, it turns the impact. More people lose their lives, and 90% of the nation doesn't have any hospital to go to. That outweighs on magnitude. But 2, it outweighs on severity because rural hospitals would be hit the hardest, as Luthi explains in 2019 that 55% of them would close. The quality of care gets worse in their world, but specifically on food insecurity, the argument doesn't make sense. They don't tell you why hospitals closing means that people won't work in agriculture. That serves as terminal Z, but if anything, we'd say it makes more workers turn to agriculture for a job. On economic growth. First, their link is that medical debt is reduced in the app. That's wrong for two reasons. One, they don't read a card saying MFRA eliminates debt. That's because it doesn't. Like Gray or 19 writes that the proposed debt alleviation plan is an entirely separate piece of policy. We're not debating that in the res. But two, if people go bankrupt, they don't have debt anymore. That's the point of bankruptcy. So their consumer spending argument doesn't make any sense. Their second link is that consumer spending increases in their world, but hospital turn services are prerequisite because once people who work in healthcare and everyone who relies on healthcare loses their jobs, they're all going to be cutting spending, not increasing it. But then you turn the arc for two reasons. One, Sanders' proposed taxes aren't even enough to fund MFRA. That means most Americans, including low-income Americans, would pay more on balance to fund MFRA. That's the bald world evidence. But secondly, pharmaceutical advancements are responsible for half of all U.S. economic growth in the past 50 years. Those are de-incentivized in the act because of the loss of profit. On the impact, they're linked to low-income countries to trade. But what low-income countries need is not more FDI to build more hotels and things. The issue isn't a matter of access to capital. Basic needs aren't met, so capital can't be used to promote investment in the long term. That's why our argument always serves as a prereq. Remember the Redfield 19 evidence that says that antibiotic innovation is critical to global health. That's why the World Health Organization writes that drug-resistant diseases could cause 10 million deaths each year by 2050. That's if small biofirms stop innovating to fight them. That only happens in the app. On the non-unique, 5 reasons why Trump's order doesn't non-unique our case. Flacco writes that even though he passed it on yesterday, Flacco writes yesterday, he passed the order on Friday, or he said that he was going to, but Flacco writes yesterday that there are 5 reasons it's not going to pass. One, it's really improbable he can do it before election day. He's losing right now. He's not going to pass it. But B, he was going to pass it, yeah, but yesterday he decided it's just a new proposal to manufacturers. It's not an actual executive order. But 3, Medicare for all, like the actual thing says that he won't decrease prices if premiums increase. If their case is true and pharmaceuticals are motivated by profit, they're not going to like suddenly cut premiums and like let prices increase. But D, unconstitutional backlash means he's not going to do it. And then E, his entire party's mad at him. He wants to like unify them for the election. He's not going to go against them. They just say that prices decrease and patient use increases. 2 issues with this. 1, it assumes that drug demand is elastic. That's not true of our niche research. But 2, our evidence says even a 1% decrease in revenue triggers the impact. They say price controls don't affect innovation, but that's about big pharma. Remember, we tell you that empirically price controls decrease R&D from these small biofirms. They just say value-based pricing is going to happen, but our boost evidence says that even if value-based pricing happens, investors still think because they don't know what's a successful innovation. That's why you're still buying our case.
All right. Oh, by the way, do you still want the value-based pricing cards? Because I have them.
No, it's okay.
Okay, cool.
Booth just like assumes that it would pass too.
Wait, can I call some cards?
Yeah.
So, on the third link, on the second link on our third contention, you say that there's a loss of innovation, and you made like a quantification of that. Can I see where the evidence for that comes from? And then secondly, did you read any evidence for the last response about like access to capital not having an impact?
Yeah, you want me to just send you my rebuttal doc? It has most of the cards in it.
Oh, that'd
Yeah,
be good.
Yeah, the
also
author name for that one was Redfield.
Oh, does it have the card that says that the pharma companies make up like half of U.S. econ growth?
Potentially no. If I can't find it in 10 seconds in my old block file, then you can just treat it as an analytic. But I'll send you the rest of the cards.
Oh, I had one more question. Which card should I look at about a 1% decrease in revenue and the impact?
That's the Goldman evidence from our impact on our subpoint B.
So Goldman, so it's the last piece of evidence in your card doc.
All right, and then do you want me to send you the rebuttal doc pre-cross?
Yeah, so I could take a look at it for summary.
All right, Redfield sent. Let me grab the other 2. I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
I sent you the card about U.S. innovation being half of GDP growth. And then what was the third thing that you wanted? It was like some quantification.
Oh, the last piece of evidence, this is like access to capital doesn't do anything.
Oh, that's the one. That's Redfield. That's sent.
Okay.
and like the World Health Organization. That's in
Which one
email
is
one.
HINJ?
That's the pharmaceutical advancements are responsible for half of all U.S. econ growth in the past 50 years.
Okay. Okay, in that case, I'm good.
All right. Do you want the first question because I spoke last?
Yeah, okay. So my question is on the value-based pricing thing. I think like your timer kind of cut you off a bit. What was the response to why like value-based pricing doesn't work?
Oh yeah. So Booth says that even though value-based pricing is like a different incentive structure, at the end of the day, you still have to innovate successfully in order to like make a lot of money back. And because investors don't know what's a successful like trial, like at the beginning, they're just too spooked and they just pull out altogether.
Wait, in the status quo, don't you need to like innovate successfully to get money back anyways?
Yeah, but we say that the profit margins are so high in the status quo, then investors do like the cost benefit analysis and they're like, okay, I'll make X million dollars. So it's worth it, but that decreases enough to where they're just not incentivized to do it in the first place in your
Wait,
world.
but
Can
isn't
I
the
take a
whole
question?
Could I just quickly follow up? Isn't the whole
Yeah.
point of like value-based pricing that the profit margins are higher if your drug works?
No, but the thing is with value-based pricing, so we tell you that currently pharma has a lot of profit cushion. Essentially, there's just a lot of capital that they have. So they're never going to take a loss that's like so detrimental that they can no longer function as a business. But with value-based pricing, in order to make the amount of capital that they need to continue running, their innovation has to be like really good and really successful. And because investors really don't know what's going to be the next like crazy new innovation when it's, being pitched to them, they don't think that the risk is worth it anymore because the profits are less, so they just pull out. Can I take a question now?
Yeah, sure. We can circle back later.
Okay. So when you talk about like US economic growth trickling over, the link is trade, right?
Yep.
Okay. So US, like our economy isn't doing so hot right now because of Corona. So how much are economies around the rest of the world like decreasing specifically because of US economic
I mean, I would say
decline?
not a lot of economies are doing hot right now because of coronavirus.
Yeah, but how much of that is specifically because of the US's economy like declining?
I'm not sure I'm following. Well, coronavirus, that's a temporary like stifling of the economy. However, when we increase economic growth, like in the long run and decades into the future, that's like a greater impact because even if coronavirus is happening right now, we can always have more economic growth.
So when economic growth is happening, what sorts of things make economic decline take over?
Wait, so we're just saying that like increasing economic growth is like really great. That's the whole purpose of
Yeah,
it.
I understand. But insofar as you access your impact through like years and years and years of growth, like you just said, we'd say there's probably a lot of unforeseen things that could happen, like another global pandemic that no one really like looks at as like something that they think will happen. So that means that like we can't be sure, even if the US economy grows a little bit initially, that it'll continue to grow.
I think that like being scared of a pandemic is not a reason that we shouldn't have growth. Like we've had a lot of growth in the past 25
Well,
years.
I mean, it's not a reason that we shouldn't have growth, but it's a reason why your impact wouldn't be triggered if there's a lot of like intervening things that could happen.
I mean,
I don't know. I think that's cross.
I'd say growth is better to get us out of this recession.
Okay. We are going to take some prep. I'm going to call Amanda. Okay. We're going to start now. Oh wait, can I see where in the bill it talks about a czar determining reimbursement rates?
Yeah, sure. So the text of both bills just says like the secretary of the HHS is like pretty much in charge of this, but I can send you the evidence too.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I sent you both cards that just like references are setting financial stuff surrounding the bill.
All right, we'll
Okay.
let you know when we get it.
Okay. Okay, I just got it. We're gonna keep running crap. Okay. So that was 50. That was a minute and a half total. So it is going to start. It's going to start on the top of our case, addressing the turns, and then move on to weighing. Okay. Is everyone ready? All right. Start on our first. Oh, shoot. Start on our first contingent, their shortages turn and their health rationing turn and their deficit turn about layoffs all are contingent on revenues going down. They simply tell you that legislation would make it sure that we would pass very low reimbursement rates. That's actually not true because what Tarlow explains is that the legislative process would likely increase reimbursement rates because obviously they don't want hospital revenues to lose revenue. The reason why this makes so much more sense than they're warranting is that when you pass Medicare for All, the government now has an incentive to provide good healthcare because all these legislators have to go up for re-election. If they go back and no one has functioning healthcare and there are no hospitals, obviously they won't get reelected. So obviously our warranty makes much more sense. Then they simply tell you that Azar can negotiate. That makes absolutely no sense. And their evidence just says he can negotiate the salaries of certain healthcare professionals. It does not say he determines reimbursement rates. It also does not say that he determines the global budget. Let's go on to, and even on top of that, even if they can win any of the turns on our contention 1 or the contention 2, it does not matter because they're impacting the US by itself, whereas we are impacting global growth, so you should probably outweigh on scope. Then let's move on to our third contention about economic growth. We're going for our second link about consumer spending. Our Leonhardt evidence tells us that people spend $10,000 a year on healthcare and all of it be saved. And when people save money, they tend to spend it, which is why Obama tells us a decrease in the healthcare growth cost by 1.5% increases GDP by 8%. And Aurora tells you because more people buy things, other countries have to export more things, which is why growth in the US is mirrored in other countries, which is why the OECD tells us it reduces poverty by about 30%. They tell you that first, hospitals function as a prerequisite. Number 1, they aren't winning the turn, but number 2, they're only impacting about 500,000 healthcare workers, whereas we're impacting the other 300 million, so we outweigh. Then they simply tell you that taxes can't fund. We tell you the Republicans probably won't pass taxes on low-income individuals or even like personal individuals because obviously it's very politically unpopular. And second, Democrats really want to combat income inequality, which is why they would likely be corporate taxes. And C, the Sanders bill literally says the average tax increase is about $800, whereas we are saving people $10,000. Our link overwhelms. Then they tell you that we would lose innovation, but their evidence about how pharmaceuticals are 50% of the innovation, A, is literally from a pharmaceutical lobbying group. You should not be trusting this evidence. And B, it says the warrant as to why pharmaceutical innovation creates economic growth is because it saves people money. We are saving people a lot more money than they do, so it always flows to us. Finally, they tell you that access to capital doesn't matter. That is absolutely not true. We're not talking about FDI. Our link is that when there are more products being exported, there has to be more jobs in order to manufacture them, and also incomes increase because now people have more jobs. Then let's go into their case. First, you probably say we outweigh on scope. Their terminal impact is about 20 million people. We are impacting 30% of the entire globe. And B, we probably link in, number 1, because we develop the healthcare industries in these nations, which means they can probably do independent pharmaceutical innovation. And B, it means that if people are increasing their incomes, they can afford more drugs. This is really important. You should probably prefer this way because it's more sustainable. But this means that other countries, like low-income countries, are not dependent on the United States for infrastructure. They can do it themselves. Let's go into innovation. They basically drop every single piece of defense. First, the women. You can extend the Whitman evidence. This is profits are super duper high. So even if they cut it 1/2 or 1/3, they can still keep going. And even on top of that, they have dropped the uniqueness that if big pharmas keep going, small pharma can also keep going because big pharma spearheads and invests into small pharma, which means that they can keep going. Then on the second contention about barrier of entry, you can also send the Taylor evidence that says prices are still way, way, way too high. Low-income people cannot afford that. It does not change if you vote neg. Or sorry, it does not change if you vote AF.
Did you send that big pharma invests in small pharma?
Yes.
I don't think that was in our rebuttal doc. I can.
Wait, yeah.
Get that.
Oh, so it was in. Oh, it was not in the rebuttal doc, but it was on the Keith turn. I was one of like before implications.
Yeah, I can send you. Do you want to see the specific card?
Wait, what? Yeah, that'd be great. I don't get how you access that via market. I can't find it. Did you already send Keith? Okay, that's why.
Yeah, I'm sending the card right now. All right, it's sent.
All right, I'll let you know when it comes.
Cool.
We
All
got
right,
the
I got it.
evidence.
So we'll start running prep. That's all of our prep.
Okay, I'm gonna go after and then neg. Extend the term we read at the top of their case. Remember that doctors are going to get paid 40% less than the AF world. Our warrant is that this Medicare for All bill is going to have to pass through conservative legislation, and they're like not going to want to increase spending for this. They try to tell you that like people want to get reelected, but they literally tell you in case that right now 1/4 of hospitals are at risk of closure. Literally, these people do not care about this, and like the reelection argument just doesn't make sense empirically. And as like the person who in the bill is negotiating salaries and the global budget, you can call for a card. It literally says the global budget's like negotiated by the secretary, has cut healthcare spending in the past. He's not going to increase it. He's going to cut this doctor spending. That's going to be really bad. Remember, empirically, just in the UK, there's half as many doctors. This acts as a prerequisite to their third contention, because when people don't get healthcare because there's huge doctor shortages, like worker efficiency is going to decrease. They're not going to be able to work when they're sick, and people are literally getting their wages cut, and people are getting laid off. Also, you can extend our turn on their second contention. Medicare for All bill isn't going to fully reimburse these hospitals, because right now private insurance companies pay way more than like the rate that like the government reimburses these hospitals. So 90% of hospitals are going to face $200 billion in cuts, and 55% of these rural hospitals they talk about are also going to face closures. That yet again acts as a prerequisite to their third contention, because these economies are not going to be growing when like the lifeline of their economy, which is rural hospitals, is shutting down. At the end of the day, you can extend what Caroline tells you, that half of this U.S. growth came from like pharmaceutical innovations, and also what we tell you is basic needs being met through pharmaceuticals acts as a prerequisite to their case, because in order to actually effectively use this capital to build your community, you need to be alive and have your basic needs met. They try to tell you that like they'll help countries like develop their own infrastructure, become less reliant on the U.S., but we're gonna outweigh on time frame, because in the meantime, while that's happening, that's gonna take a long time to build your own pharmaceutical industry and like grow up this economy. 20 million people are gonna literally die every year. We're gonna that's way big. Also, unclear impact. They don't actually terminalize how many people they affect. But you do know that in our world, 2 million people die every year from antibiotic resistance, and 20 million people get their HIV treatment taken away. They just read a ton of nebulous percentages, and you don't actually know how many people they affect. On our case, you can extend our second link about external investments. Remember, Cliff 18 finds that when price controls happen, it's less desirable for investors. Empirically, this literally happened. Empiric proof, the probability is 100% that when this happened, investment into these companies fell by 44% because investors are scared. They try to tell you that like the profit margins are really inflated, but realize that's for big pharma. It's not specific to the small biotech companies we talk about. And their card that says big pharma spearheads this investment is literally our case. Big pharmaceutical companies and venture capitalists are not going to want to invest in small biotech companies when there's no incentive to innovate. Remember, extend antibiotic resistance. What we tell you is that this affects the entire world, and the U.S. is making the majority of this innovation for these pathogens. And 2 million people right now get an infection, but they get cured because of this innovation. Then on subpoint B, all they say is that prices are really high right now because of parallel trade, but they don't provide any comparative. How much lower would they be in the AF world? You don't know, but you do know that right now, 6% of those in low-income, people in low-income countries are only paying 6% of U.S. prices, and 20 million people get access. Even if you grant them access to this response, it's not responsive to Kyle finds. No matter what, in the AF world, they're not going to sell at all in these countries because there's like huge barriers to entry in these markets, and they don't have enough capital to enter those countries. Okay, we're ready for Grand Cross.
Okay. Let me just grab the time. Okay, so can I grab the first question?
Yeah.
Okay. So on your second subpoint, you simply tell me that people in lower income countries still pay 6% of what people in, for example, the United States pay. So if the drug prices that they pay are still too high for the vast majority of people to afford, why does it matter that it's still lower than what people pay in the United States?
The issue, you don't implicate how many people cannot afford drugs. We literally tell you 20 million do get drugs. And we also tell you, regardless of whether or not prices would decrease in the developing world, they don't sell in the developing world at all, because you don't respond to Kyle, who tells you they don't have enough capital to keep up this infrastructure and fixed costs to sell in the developing world in the first place.
I think that makes sense.
You don't tell us how much lower prices would get in the app and how many more people would be affected.
My argument is not that prices would decrease in the affirmative. Like, this is not a turn. This is simply a defensive argument that says the prices that these pharmaceutical companies are charging in low-income countries are still way too high for the vast majority of people to afford. Even if, for example, your
Yeah,
example about
Jonathan.
20 million people getting solved is true.
Jonathan, the issue with this is you don't implicate how many people still can't afford drugs and whether or not that's something that can be solved at all. So at best, this is mitigation. But insofar as you don't give us any number, we also went on scope here. We tell you that 20 million people gain access to HIV medication for less than $100 a year, specifically because of these programs. Like, it's really clear that we're winning this sub point. Can I take a question?
But you are winning this 20 million impact. And
Yeah.
okay.
So your mitigation, if for all we know, just means that there are 5 people who can't afford. Like you don't give us any comparative number.
That just makes
Your
no
nebulous
sense.
number, you don't tell how many people don't get drugs. We tell you it's not worth it to risk them not selling at all for these 20 million people. Like, the trade-off is way too big. And so you don't tell us how many more people would get the drugs.
I see.
Could I take a question?
I'll take a question. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So when you talk about like imports increasing, that's like exporting labor, right?
No.
On your case?
Our argument is that
Are we buying goods from them?
Yes, we are buying goods from other countries.
Okay, who's making the goods?
Like people in those
Like,
countries.
People.
Yeah,
in
how good are the
countries that
labor?
reside.
How good are the labor laws?
They get better over time.
Like,
because
your
the
argument
reason
is
why
that
they're
it's really
so
for
bad.
emerging.
Wait, if like
I don't know.
economic
Like, y'all
growth,
hear me
like
out. I know we haven't said this yet in round. I won't make it like a major thing in Final Focus. That's really cheap. But just like on the record, I think it's pretty sus to just be like, it really helps emerging economies when we exploit their children so the US can buy more cheap goods. Like, that's good because their economy grows,
Okay,
you know?
okay.
I think that might be.
Like,
I
it
think
just
that's
seems kind
true
of
in.
sus.
Well, I think that's
Yeah.
true in like maybe isolated scenarios. But I think overall, if people are still making more money and the development cycle is increasing, that's probably good for the vast majority of people. For example, that's why when like a lot of countries start to industrialize, that's when they start having more stricter labor standards.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe we have a minute and a half left. We're gonna start running it. Amanda, you gonna mute? Okay, we're gonna start running it.
All right, cool. So the order is just going to be our case weighing their case. Is everyone ready? All right, cool. Start at the top. They try to extend these turns straight to Jonathan's responses. Jonathan's response is simply that, like, Tarlo tells you that after the legislative process, all of these like reimbursement rates will probably be a lot higher because the government obviously does not want to push hospitals and doctors out of business. This makes a lot of sense. We outweigh on incentive. Once the government takes control of the healthcare systems, obviously they want to give people better healthcare so they can be reelected. Their only response is that that's not happening right now. Yeah, that's because Medicare for All hasn't been passed yet. All these hospitals are like private hospitals. The government doesn't have responsibility for them. This changes in our world. And And secondly, let's talk about our third contention, economic growth. We're winning this very, very clearly. Leon tells you that the average American spends $10,000 a year on healthcare costs. Once Medicare for All steps in and alleviates this burden, that's trillions of extra dollars back into the economy. That's why Obama tells you that for every 1.5% decrease in the rise of healthcare cost growth, this increases GDP by 8% because of trade linkages with the rest of the world. Every 1% increase in economic growth, like in the US, spills over and increases growth in the rest of the world as well. This is great. The OECD finds that this will decrease poverty by 30% because the real incomes of these people in other nations are increasing. They have a few responses. First, they make this new implication of their hospitals turn that people are getting sick more and they can't work. However, this is like new in second summary, you probably shouldn't evaluate it. And second, they don't win their hospital turn anyway. And third, even if people have like slightly longer wait times, that's not a prerequisite. They still have money to spend back into the economy. This isn't like a real prereq of our argument. And then they say that like people will lose jobs. However, Jonathan already did the weighing for this. Like 350 million people are still getting better economic statuses. That probably outweighs like 500,000 jobs being lost. And then they try to outweigh on time frame. They say that 20 million people are being saved from dying each year. Their evidence doesn't say this happens every year. Like the same 20 million people are just getting access to HIV treatments. And then secondly, this is like a really low probability impact that they won't get treatment under the AF world because other countries such as like India and China still provide the majority of these treatments. And third, like we outweigh on scope. They shouldn't win just because their impact happens sooner. We say that we impact like 30% of the rest of the world. That's like billions of people. It outweighs like 20 million people. And then we also link in, this is the way Jonathan gives you, which is really, really good. He tells you that when economic growth happens in other nations, their domestic pharmaceutical industries increase, and also they're more likely to be able to afford drugs. So in the long run, they're not going to be dependent on the US. We saw back for their case as well.
All right, we're gonna go there, or no, we'll go our case weighing their case. All right, ready? They drop barriers to entry and final focus. Remember, we tell you it's a zero-sum game when it comes to drug sales in emerging economies versus the United States. Stewart tells us that empirically, people in emerging economies and low-income countries pay 6% of US prices when it comes to drugs. Goldman tells us that even if their revenue only decreases 1%, that means that drugs are less likely to enter the markets there. That's where our McNeil evidence tells you that on net, these programs save 20 million lives every year by providing HIV medication. Their only response is that some people still can't afford it, but they don't respond to what Jack said in summary, that we say it's net better for 20 million people that this program continues. It's not worth like sacrificing those lives just because some people can't afford it. Our Kyle evidence is super clear. There's not enough capital for these US pharmaceuticals to enter the market without high US prices subsidizing it. At that point, we outweigh for two reasons. First, they drop our prereq. Remember, we tell you a prerequisite to enjoying the benefits of a good economy is being alive. That's why you're always looking to our case first, because we provide people with pharmaceuticals that are literally saving their lives. But secondly, they try to link in through this idea of independent innovation, but they clean drop what Jack tells you in summary, that we're outweighing on time frame here, even if their argument is true, and like this independent innovation will happen eventually. We say 20 million people die every year because of a lack of access to drugs. And we'd say this takes a really long time insofar as there's barely any health infrastructure existent in the first place. That's why you always prefer our case. But then let's look at theirs. While their third contention might be true in a void, we say the actual implementation of Medicare for All means that consumer spending is not going to increase. They really mishandle the terms. The only thing they extend in final focus is that the legislative process means that reimbursement rates would be high because people want to be reelected. But they drop what Jack tells you in summary, that if their warrant is true and people want to be reelected and hospitals are so important for this reelection, then they wouldn't be failing in the status quo. But insofar as they read you in case that 1 in 4 hospitals are on the brink of failing right now, we see it's not like important enough for politicians to save them. That's why we see empirically that it's always worse in their world, because doctors are paid 40% less, and hospitals, 90% of hospitals across the entire US face $200 billion worth of cuts. Our Abelson evidence is really clear. That means they mass lay off workers. That's always a prereq to their third contention, because no one's going to be increasing consumer spending when they lose their jobs. They say that's a new implication, but it was in rebuttal and summary. At that point, you have to vote neg.
All right, good round, guys.
Good round.
Yeah, thanks for debating.
Yeah, you too.
All right, I'm gonna run to the bathroom because I think this will probably take a couple minutes.